The crash landing. Liam Hawkins, a rugged space smuggler, had seen his fair share of dangerous situations, but nothing quite like this. His once pristine spacecraft, a sleek, modified freighter, was now a twisted hulk of metal and scorched panels, lodged deep in an alien jungle. Smoke billowed from the engine compartment, a constant reminder of the close call he had just survived. Liam had been cruising through a remote sector of space on a simple contraband run, the kind he had done 1,000 times before, when the ES fighter had appeared out of nowhere. In an instant, his ship had been clipped by the enemy craft, sending him careening uncontrollably toward the planet below. Now, as he pulled himself out of the wreckage, his head spinning, Liam couldn't help but mutter, "Just my luck." His hands were bloodied, his blue eyes narrowed as he wiped the sweat off his brow, pushing himself to his feet despite the searing pain in his leg. He looked around, taking in the dense foliage that surrounded him. The jungle was thick, an overwhelming tangle of vines, towering trees, and otherworldly plants. The air was thick with humidity, and the sunlight filtering through the canopy made the green undergrowth glow with an eerie, unearthly light. "Well, this is new," he said to himself, dragging a deep breath into his lungs. His ship had been sturdy, but not invincible. He was lucky to be alive, but luck only went so far. Now he needed to focus on survival. His survival. Ships totaled, no comms, no backup. "Great," he muttered. Liam limped around the wreckage of his ship, his legs aching as he moved. His mind raced, calculating the best course of action. The ship's computer had insisted that the planet was uninhabited before it went offline, but as Liam surveyed the jungle, he was starting to wonder just how accurate that assessment had been. No planet like this, so thick with life, was likely to be truly uninhabited. And those strange animal calls he'd heard in the distance only confirmed his suspicions. This place wasn't as empty as his computer had claimed. His survival instincts kicked in. No time to waste. He made his way toward the cargo hold, carefully avoiding the jagged remains of his ship's frame. Thankfully, the storage compartment had remained intact, and inside it were the basic tools he would need to start working his way out of this mess. He pulled out his survival pack and a phase pistol, tucking the weapon into the waistband of his pants. As he worked, Liam kept a wary eye on the jungle around him. The sounds of the alien wilderness seemed to surround him, sometimes distant, sometimes close enough to make the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. He quickly gathered whatever supplies he could salvage from the ship and began to set up a temporary shelter against the side of the wreck. The sun began to set, casting an orange glow across the jungle, and with it came a sense of unease. The air grew thicker, and the distant howls of unseen creatures echoed through the trees. Liam wasn't sure if it was the planet's natural fauna or if there was something else lurking in the shadows, but he wasn't about to wait around to find out. He set up a few rudimentary traps around the crash site, hoping they might provide some security through the night. He also activated perimeter alerts on the ship's damaged systems, though he wasn't sure how reliable they would be. Exhausted but not willing to fall asleep unprepared, Liam collapsed onto the bedroll he had laid out beside the wreckage, keeping the phased pistol close by. He could feel the tension in his muscles, a raw edge of anticipation, but exhaustion eventually overtook him. As the alien night fell deeper around him, Liam drifted into a restless sleep, the sounds of the jungle mixing with his dreams. Suddenly, a loud, shrill screech ripped through the silence. Liam's eyes snapped open. His heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline surging through his body. He grabbed for the phase pistol, his hand trembling slightly as he aimed it toward the source of the noise. It wasn't an animal. A loud, angry hiss, followed by a proximity alarm blaring to life on his wrist, sent Liam bolting upright. His pulse was racing, his mind trying to process the situation. He scrambled to his feet, scanning the gray pre-dawn light filtering through the jungle. What had triggered the alarm? What was out there? Then, just beyond the tree line, he saw it. Suspended by one leg in one of his traps was a creature unlike any Liam had ever seen before. She was humanoid, female in form, but her skin was covered in shimmering, iridescent green scales. Her long hair cascaded down her back in wild waves, and her piercing yellow-green eyes glared at him with an intensity that could burn a hole through steel. Her body was athletic, her posture tense and defensive, as she hissed, showing off sharp, pointed teeth. Liam's pulse quickened as he took in the sight before him. A woman? No, she was something else entirely. Her slender frame, covered in scales, was unlike any human he had ever seen, and yet her movements were graceful, as if she were more predator than prey. Holy hell, Liam breathed, lowering his pistol slightly but still keeping it trained on her. His eyes narrowed in disbelief as he watched her struggle against the trap that had caught her. Well, that's one way to meet the locals. The woman's eyes locked onto his, filled with a mixture of fury and defiance. Her lips curled back slightly as she spoke in a series of hissing, clicking sounds that Liam didn't understand. He wasn't sure if she was angry or warning him to stay away, but the intensity in her gaze was unmistakable. Liam took a cautious step forward, still holding his weapon, but his tone shifted to one of calm assurance. Easy now. I'm not here to hurt you. His voice was low, soothing as he moved closer. This is just a misunderstanding. Let me get you down from there. The alien woman's eyes flicked toward his weapon, then back to his face. Her muscles coiled, and for a moment, Liam wasn't sure if she would spring at him or try to flee. But instead, she remained frozen in place, watching him closely, her posture tense. Liam stepped closer to the trap release, his hand hovering near the mechanism that would free her. He kept his voice steady, his movements slow and deliberate. I'm not going to hurt you, he repeated, his free hand raised in a peaceful gesture. Just let me get you down. Her gaze never wavered from his as she tensed, waiting to see if his actions matched his words. She didn't trust him, and Liam didn't blame her. But he wasn't about to make things worse by reacting aggressively. With a soft click, he released the trap. The woman's body twisted in midair as she landed gracefully on the ground, her muscles coiling like a serpent, and in an instant she was crouched low, poised to strike. Liam froze, keeping his distance. The two of them stared at each other for a long, tense moment. The air between them was thick with uncertainty. The human and the alien, two strangers in a strange place, each sizing the other up, neither willing to make the first move. Liam's brain raced, trying to figure out what to do next. He had never found himself in a situation like this before, and the confusion in his mind was only matched by the curiosity and wariness in his heart. What was she? And more importantly, why hadn't she attacked him the moment she was free? The unlikely standoff. The early morning air was thick with humidity as Liam Hawkins and the strange alien woman, now free from his trap, stood facing each other in the heart of the jungle. Her golden green eyes, sharp and wary, never left him as she crouched in a defensive position, ready to spring at a moment's notice. Her body was coiled, her muscular frame taut with tension. Liam, on the other hand, stood motionless, his phase pistol still trained on her, though his posture was less aggressive now. There was no telling what this creature might do next, but Liam knew one thing for certain. He had to stay calm. Panic would only make things worse. He had been in tight spots before, but this was different. He wasn't just dealing with hostile beings, he was facing something completely unknown. An alien, an entirely new life form that he couldn't possibly predict. The woman's eyes flicked to the pistol in his hand, then back to his face, clearly calculating her next move. She seemed to weigh her options, and for a moment, the air between them felt thick with the weight of unspoken words. Neither one of them moved, the tense standoff stretching on like an eternity. Liam sighed, lowering the weapon slightly, though he kept it in hand. Look, he said, his voice calm but firm. I'm not your enemy. I've got no reason to harm you. He took a careful step back, hoping to show that he wasn't a threat. I just crashed here, and now I'm trying to figure out how to survive long enough to get off this damn planet. If we could just talk, maybe we can work something out." The woman's sharp gaze never wavered, but she didn't move either. Her lips curled slightly, exposing her pointed teeth, and her tongue flicked out, a serpentine motion that Liam couldn't quite interpret. Then, slowly, she spoke, her voice a strange mix of hissing and melodic tones that sent a shiver through him. It was unlike anything he had ever heard, and though he didn't understand a single word, the intent behind her voice was unmistakable. It was full of warning, of caution, like she was trying to decide whether he was worth the effort. Liam didn't respond immediately, but he understood the message loud and clear. She wasn't interested in making friends. Her body language said it all. She was on edge, ready to strike if he made a wrong move. And in this unknown jungle, where danger could lurk behind every tree, he couldn't afford to make the wrong move. His eyes darted briefly to the trees around them, listening for any signs of movement. The jungle felt alive with the sounds of unseen creatures, the distant rustle of leaves, and the occasional low growl echoing through the thick underbrush. There were dangers here, and Liam didn't want to become one of them. But he had to find a way to get this alien woman on his side, at least long enough to figure out how to survive. "You're not alone out here, are you?" Liam asked, his voice softer now. "I don't know what kind of planet this is, but I've got a feeling I'm not the only one stuck here." He gestured to the dense jungle around them. "I'm not looking for a fight. I just need a way off this rock, and I could use some help." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly, the slight twitch of her tongue betraying her suspicion. She tilted her head slightly, studying him with an expression that was both calculating and curious. There was something almost human in the way she looked at him, as if trying to make sense of his words, trying to understand. But whatever language she spoke, it wasn't one he could comprehend, not without that translator device he had back at the wreckage. Still, she wasn't attacking. That was a good sign, right? Okay, Liam continued, keeping his tone as neutral as possible. "If you don't want to talk, that's fine. But we're both in this mess together, and I'm willing to work with you, if you're willing to work with me." The alien woman stepped back slightly, her gaze flicking toward his survival pack. Her eyes followed his movements as he reached for the pack, unzipping it and pulling out a few basic supplies, nutrient bars, a med kit, and a few tools. She watched him closely, her posture still guarded but a little less tense. She was trying to figure him out. Liam could see it in her eyes. He decided to take another gamble. Reaching into the pack, he pulled out a small device, a universal translator tablet. He had salvaged it from the wreckage. It wasn't the most advanced piece of technology, but it might help bridge the gap between them. Liam held it up, his thumb poised over the power button. "This might help," he said, though he wasn't sure she understood. "It'll let us communicate." He tapped the screen, and after a moment, the device hummed to life, displaying a message in a standard galactic script. Liam didn't speak the language, but the translation device was his best bet. He cautiously offered the tablet to her, his eyes never leaving hers. She seemed to hesitate for a moment, watching him as though she expected him to try something. Then, slowly, she reached out, her webbed fingers brushing against the device as she took it from him. Her eyes flicked over the screen, her brow furrowing as she tried to figure out how it worked. For a few moments, she was engrossed in the device, tapping at the screen with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. Liam held his breath, hoping this wouldn't end in disaster. Finally, she stopped, looking back at him, and the translator spoke in her voice. "Human male," the device chimed, "you have freed me from your trap. By the customs of my people, I owe you a life debt. I must repay you by any means you require." Liam's stomach dropped. He hadn't expected that. A life debt. This was getting complicated fast. He blinked, struggling to process the words. "Wait, what? Life debt?" He rubbed his forehead, trying to make sense of it all. "Look, I didn't help you just to get some kind of reward. I'm just trying to survive here. But, thanks, I guess. The woman, Alia as the translator had just revealed, stood tall and unblinking, her sharp gaze studying him intently. The device spoke again, her voice much softer this time. I must repay you, the translator repeated, including bearing your offspring, if that is your desire. Liam's mouth went dry. This day had gone from bad to worse, and it didn't seem like it was slowing down anytime soon. Wait, hold up, Liam stammered. That's a bit much. I didn't ask for that, okay? Alia tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing as though she were trying to understand his reluctance. She wasn't angry, but her expression was firm. Her body language made it clear that for her, this was a serious matter. I cannot refuse this debt, she said, her voice steady, the translator now giving Liam the full weight of her words. Liam let out a long, frustrated sigh. He wasn't sure what was worse: being stuck on an unknown alien world with an alien woman who owed him a life debt, or the fact that she expected him to accept this bizarre custom. The pressure was mounting, and the urgency of his situation made it all the more complicated. He needed to get off this planet. Fast. Okay, Liam said, trying to regain his composure. I'll figure this out later. For now, let's just focus on getting out of here alive, all right? Alia didn't respond immediately, but she seemed to study him for a moment longer. Finally, she nodded, her lips pressed tightly together. Until moonrise, I await your decision, she said, turning to walk deeper into the jungle, leaving Liam standing there in stunned silence. The weight of her words hung heavy in the air as he watched her retreat. The jungle around him was eerily quiet now, as if even the wildlife was holding its breath. Liam ran a hand through his hair, trying to process everything that had just happened. What the hell have I gotten myself into? He muttered to himself. But there was no turning back now. He had a life debt to deal with, an alien woman to navigate, and an unknown planet to survive on. It was going to be a long day. The life debt and the unforeseen consequences. Liam watched Alia disappear into the dense jungle with a mix of confusion, concern, and a strange, lingering curiosity. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, trying to make sense of the situation he found himself in. Just a few hours ago, he was on a routine smuggling run, doing the job he had done 1,000 times before. Now he was stranded on a dangerous, uncharted planet with a beautiful, but very dangerous, alien who had just pledged a life debt to him. And the kicker? She was expecting him to make some kind of decision about how to claim that debt by moonrise. What the hell have I gotten myself into? Liam muttered, pacing in circles around the wreckage of his ship. He ran a hand through his disheveled hair, frustration mounting with every passing second. He couldn't just brush off what had happened. Alia's words rang in his ears. By the traditions of my people, I owe you a life debt. I must repay you by any means you require. And as bizarre as it sounded, he knew that refusing it outright wasn't an option. Her people had a strict code when it came to life debts, and Liam wasn't stupid enough to make an enemy of someone who could, quite literally, tear him apart. He glanced around at the wreckage of his ship, the wrecked hull reflecting the dying orange light of the setting sun. The thought of trying to repair it seemed futile. Without proper tools, a clear route to the nearest settlement, and someone to help him, there was no way he was getting out of here anytime soon. All right, think, Hawkins, think, he said aloud, his voice shaking with a mix of anger and nervousness. He took a few deep breaths, attempting to ground himself, but the weight of the situation was too much. He had a deadline now, a deadline that involved deciding what to do with an alien woman who seemed to be completely serious about her offer. His options were slim, but he couldn't afford to act impulsively. I need to focus on surviving, he muttered to himself, looking back toward the jungle where Alia had gone. There was no getting around it. He needed her help if he had any hope of making it through this, and he had to figure out how to do it without making things worse. Suddenly, The low hum of the jungle's wildlife was interrupted by a sharp hiss, followed by the faint rustle of leaves. Liam's heart jumped into his throat. He immediately reached for his phase pistol, but his hand stopped halfway to the weapon. It wasn't an animal. Aelia. She emerged from the shadows of the trees, her slender figure gliding gracefully through the underbrush, her eyes glowing faintly in the twilight. She moved with purpose, her expression unreadable, though there was an intensity in her gaze that made Liam take an involuntary step back. Her long hair, wild and flowing, framed her striking face as she approached, her body language suggesting she wasn't done with their conversation from earlier. "Do you regret saving me, human?" Aelia's voice was calm but firm. Her tone carried an underlying sharpness, one that suggested she wasn't used to being questioned or refused. She didn't wait for an answer before continuing. "You seem troubled by your debt. You should not be." Liam swallowed hard, his throat dry. "It's not that I regret helping you," he said carefully, trying to keep his voice steady. "It's just, everything's moving way too fast. I didn't sign up for this kind of responsibility." Aelia's gaze softened ever so slightly, but her posture remained strong, unwavering. "I did not ask you to, but I owe you, and my debt is not to be taken lightly." She stepped closer, her voice lowering as if she were sharing a private thought. "You saved me, and now I must repay you. This is the way of my people." Liam was quiet for a long moment, considering her words. As much as he wanted to argue or protest, he knew there was no point. Aelia wasn't someone who would easily be swayed, and he had no idea what kind of consequences there might be if he refused her offer outright. He needed to think strategically. "So," Liam started slowly, "what exactly is this life debt business? You say you owe me, but how does that work exactly?" Aelia's expression remained steady as she answered, but there was a hint of something new in her eyes, something that looked like understanding. "In my culture, a life debt is sacred. If you save someone's life, you are bound to them, and it is your duty to fulfill whatever they ask of you. It is not something to be taken lightly, for it cannot be broken once it has been given. The debt can be repaid in many ways: assistance, protection, even personal service." Liam's mind raced. Personal service. He thought, the implications of that statement making him uneasy. "I don't think I can get into all that, but..." Before he could continue, Aelia spoke again, her voice even but firm. "I do not expect you to claim it right away, but before the moon rises, you must decide what you will ask of me. It is the way of my people." Liam ran a hand through his hair, the weight of her words pressing on him harder than before. The jungle had grown darker around them, and with it came an unsettling stillness, as if the very planet was holding its breath. He had only a few hours to figure out what he was going to do with this strange, beautiful, and incredibly dangerous alien woman who was bound to him by an ancient code of honor. "Okay," Liam said finally, his voice a little sharper now. "I get it. But I still need your help. This planet's got me stranded here, and I don't think I'm going to get off it on my own. So let's start with something simple. How do we get to the nearest spaceport?" Aelia's gaze softened, and for the first time since they had met, Liam saw something akin to a hint of kindness in her eyes. It was fleeting, but it was there. She stepped back slightly, turning her gaze to the dense jungle ahead. "The nearest spaceport is several days' travel," she explained, her voice taking on a more serious tone. "But we can get there if we work together. The jungle is dangerous. I know these lands well, but even I must be cautious. You have no idea what creatures lurk here." "Sounds like fun," Liam muttered, his mind already working on how to survive in this strange alien world. Aelia's expression didn't change, but there was a faint flicker of amusement in her eyes. "Fun? You do not understand, human. This world is wild and untamed. There are things here that can kill you in an instant." But she paused and turned back to face him fully. "If you trust me, I can guide you. The life debt is sacred, and I will fulfill it, whatever you ask." Liam stood there, considering her words. He wasn't sure what to make of the life debt, or whether he could ever accept what she offered, but one thing was clear: he was stuck on this planet, and Alia was his best shot at getting out alive. "All right then," he said after a long pause. "I'll trust you for now. But you better not get me killed, or we'll both be in trouble." Alia's lips curved into a small, knowing smile, but she said nothing. Without another word, she turned and began to walk deeper into the jungle, her movements swift and sure, as though she had no doubts about the path ahead. Liam followed, still unsure of the future that awaited him. The jungle stretched out before him, thick with mystery and danger, but with Alia by his side, he had at least some hope of surviving the ordeal. The life debt, he thought, might not be something he could refuse, but it was a debt he hadn't yet decided how to claim. And the clock was ticking.